This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Tech, show number 121, recorded on June 9th, 2013. Here in Home Tech, we cover all your favorite tech gadgets that find their way into your home. News, reviews, product updates, and conversation, all for the Average Tech Guy. I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the AverageGuy.tv studios here in Bellevue, Nebraska. Kind of a rainy weekend, Bellevue, Nebraska. A good time to stay inside and get some stuff done, get some tech stuff done. And, of course, we post the show each week with world-class show notes out at the AverageGuy.tv. If you have questions or comments, even contributions, you can send me an email, podcast at theaverageguy.tv. Many of you have over the last couple of weeks. Appreciate that. And you can also track me down on Twitter, just at Jay Collison, or follow the show schedule at the Average Guy TV. And for this special podcast going on this weekend, we've got live chat going on with the BYOB guys. And so if you are, if you want to, hopefully by now, if you're finding us on YouTube and you want to join us for the live chat, head over to the AverageGuy.tv/live. Look to the right of your window if you're on live stream, and there's chat there. All you need to do is log in, create a handle, no account needed at live stream. And you can join in the chat. If you're joining us via YouTube on the same spot, that chat window is just right above you, and you can do it out there as well. Special thanks to both to Mike and Mike here for letting me kind of bust in on their weekend podcast. It's always fun to get with these guys and broadcast this thing live because we don't always get a live BYOB show. Sometimes you have to wait for the recorded version. Mike Faucher, Michael Martis, thanks for letting me, kind of crash the party.
No,
anytime.
You, Jim. Anytime is right. No, we appreciate the joint efforts. It was fun last time, and I'm sure it'll be fun this time as well.
Yeah, and I'll put a pre-invite out for you guys. Windows 8, 8.1, 8.1, whatever we're going to call it, is coming out here at the end of the month, and
yes.
At least the pre-release is coming out. I've got a couple shows slated for that, but I want to see if maybe in early July we can do the same kind of thing on a Sunday. Get the two of you in, and we'll talk Windows 8, 8.1. So I'll ask that in advance. So hopefully that'll work out, and we can get together on that. Well,
sounds good.
We've been doing a series on virtualization, and I know that we brought you guys in for the home networking series as well. And I know both of you are neck deep in virtualization, and I wanted to get your opinion. And we've tried to focus on this aspect from the home, right? I said on a show before, 5 or 6 years ago, we really probably there weren't many people doing virtualization in the home. But over the last couple years, it's been a topic that at least it's piqued my interest, and I think a lot of folks are doing more and more virtualization at home. Michael, I know that you're doing it on a regular basis at work, right? I mean, that's kind of a core part of what you do.
No, actually, we're almost all straight bare metal at work. It's kind of funny. It's just the way they actually prefer to have a physical server for everything. We're working towards that, but we're not quite there yet. But for my consulting, I do a lot of virtualization, and of course at home I'm almost all virtualized.
Okay, so maybe that's where I'm picking up is from the home and the consulting work that you do. Exactly. Mike Faucher, let's start with you. Maybe we could back up a little bit and start with just kind of what are you running. How have you come to virtualization, and what do you currently have going on in your environment there?
Well, how I came around it was primarily through experimentation. I mean, I just wanted to learn about it, so I really wanted to see how it could be deployed in the home, because that's always been a challenge. I mean, the concept, the technology, it's all cool, but how do you really put it to use is really the thing I struggled with for a long time. I mean, I certainly saw it in an environment, we run VMs at work, for things like mail servers, SQL, and things like that. But when it came to a practical application at home, I really struggled with that for a long time. And then I finally came to grips with, deciding I really wanted to cut back the number of physical boxes and said, if I could get the stuff to work right, there was a real use case for me, and that's kind of how I got into it.
So what do you have running right now then in your environment? What specifically do you have running?
Well, in terms of hardware, I'm using a Core i5 with 32 gigs of RAM, and I'm running Server 2012 with Hyper-V. So all of my VMs are set up on Hyper-V. and then I'm using a USB device that allows me to attach USB devices to various VMs. So that was sort of the big driver for me, was to be able to tie some of the peripherals together for some of the things that I was trying to do, initially through home automation and ultimately through other things.
Now, 2012 standard, I assume, is what you're running as the base,
Mm-hmm.
right? 2012 standard. And,
right.
I've been messing around with that over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Pretty easy setup to get that running. I mean, I think in the testing I've done with the drive, I've actually, instead of installing Windows on there to get the benchmark software working, I just put server on there, fired it up, and then as soon as it was ready to go, brought the benchmark software on and ran it. That installs in about, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes. It goes really, really fast. It works out of the chute. I mean, for the average guy, right? That server's a fairly easy setup, right?
Yeah, I mean, just the basic portion of it is. I mean, obviously there's a lot of configurations you can do, and Mike knows far more than I do about that. But in terms of just the basic setup and to get it up and running and to be able to access Hyper-V is really simple. It's just not unfortunately, not everybody has access to 2012, but Hyper-V works basically the same on Windows 8. I did a couple of write-ups on running it on Windows 8, and it works works the same.
Let me ask you this, or maybe I'll ask both of you this. So I went out and got, because I was doing a whole bunch of work with hard drives, and I was constantly kind of breaking the RAID in the process, and so I would, I'd break the RAID down, I'd reestablish it, I would then fire it back up and install Windows Server back on top of it. I just downloaded the 180-day trial version that you don't have to have TechNet or MSDN to use. Now, if you're at all thinking about this, I think that's a pretty nice way to go about this and get in. It seems to be fully functioning. I haven't seen anything yet. Maybe Michael Martis, am I getting the same thing in the trial that I'm going to get in a full suite of a server software?
Yep, it's the full-blown real deal. The only downside, and I kind of found out this the hard way, is if you're running the eval version, you won't be able to just input a legitimate key and all of a sudden it just magically becomes a production server. You actually have to kill it after 180 days.
Okay, so that's good. I guess that's good to know. I've been touting that as saying, hey, just use the trial. Somebody has said you could, but you're saying you can't, and that's, I think, one way or another. I'm using it in a test environment, so I know I'm going to kind of constantly be blowing it away when I'm doing it. Now, so I'm bringing up server. As soon as I bring up server, I go into the management console and I enable the Hyper-V role, and then I take all the defaults. So yes, next, bam. Hyper-V gets installed. I go to the Hyper-V manager and I fire up, what's necessary to get a VM running. It doesn't seem all that difficult to me. I thought it was going to be harder. Am I doing it right? Am I missing anything? I mean, should it be harder than that?
You can make it harder.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, am I missing anything by just taking the defaults on that setup?
No. I mean, the server has so much functionality. It's not even funny. So I mean, you could really bury yourself really easy. I think the way you did it's probably the best way to do it. Starting out.
Okay, well, good. So
the defaults for the server is I don't think you're missing anything at all. I mean, that's something that you can certainly go out of your way to make complicated. Even taking the defaults on creating most of your VMs probably would be okay for at least experimental processes.
Yeah. One of the defaults I don't take is when I'm creating a Windows 8 or a Windows 7 VM, it wants to give me like 512 mega RAM, and I always bump that to 2048 or whatever to give it 2 gig. So that's maybe the one default I do change. I have really
the drive size too. I think the drive size is a little bit squirrely.
Yeah, I think is that a calculation that they give you, or is, like, I noticed it was like 127 gig, and
it's always 127 gig. I don't know where that came from. Every time I've seen it.
That's kind of an odd number. I change it. I don't know about you guys, but for those Windows 7 and Windows 8 VMs, I just bring that back to 60 gig and run it that way. Is that advisable, or would you give it more?
Depends what you're doing.
Yeah, it depends what you're doing.
Okay.
Most of my VMs are not concerned about a whole lot of storage, so I usually give it less. And you can certainly, set it up as a dynamic and have it increase, but on its own. But I usually give it a fixed size, and I usually give it much smaller than that. And I know Mike's probably going to talk about, some of the new features in the Hyper-V 3.0 that allows you to kind of minimize your footprint of some of your VMs.
Okay. We kind of, Michael, we kind of skipped yours. Why don't you take a second? And Mike Faucher, you are running all Hyper-V at this point? You're not running any other virtualization?
I played around for quite a while with ESXi, which has a whole new set of features and certainly a whole new set of problems. I liked it, but the complexity level goes up, an order of magnitude. We can certainly talk about that if you want to talk about it now or talk about it later, but it is a really, really powerful environment, and it certainly allows you to do far more than Hyper-V, and certainly in terms of your client installs or your guest installs, and as well as the tunability and how you can configure it, but you just have a longer learning curve. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're looking for a quick solution to a VM, short of using VirtualBox, which I don't think you want to run in a production environment, Hyper-V is just great.
Okay, let's come back around to that. Mike or Michael, can you give us kind of what what you've got running back there in the rack?
Right now, I'm running an Intel Xeon E3-1230, and it's sitting in a Supermicro X9 SCL Plus-F, which just means it's got the IPMI on it, and 16 gigs of ECC RAM.
Oh, just 16?
Just 16 for right now. I just recently changed my server over. I used to have a more consumer-based i3 server.
Yeah, I was going to say
32 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, for the longest time you were like, "Hey, I can get away with 32 with a Core i3. It works just fine."
Yeah, and that's what I was using. I was using a Core i3 3220. It was sitting on a Gigabyte Z77 D3H motherboard, and I had 32 gigs of just G.Skill Aries RAM sitting in it, and it ran like a champ. And I just recently switched over just because I wanted the additional NICs and functionality from the Supermicro board. So,
and which additional functionality did you get?
IPMI.
Oh, which is what for the average guy?
IPMI is basically IP management interface. Okay. So basically, it's got a separate LAN port, and you just give it an IP address, so like 192.1. Whatever, 100, and when you go into it through a web portal, you can interact with the motherboard and the BIOS functions. You can see if it's like hanging on boot, that kind of thing. Okay. You can manage a lot of the BIOS settings from the background.
Oh, so it's like a management port, basically, right? You just go to it and it's got all the management. Okay, that makes sense. So how many VMs are you running?
I just got the server up and running yesterday, so 2.
Oh. Okay.
But prior to that, on the i3, I was running, production-wise, I was running 4, and I had on and off anywhere from those 4 to 25 VMs at one time.
So how many, what's the max you probably ran at any given time, do you think?
25. I ran 25.
Really?
For about two and a half weeks while I was doing some testing. So I needed a large network with, I had probably 6, 7 servers, and the rest were all client machines that I just had attached in through different roles, and I would just send them on scheduled tasks just to see what the loading was like on the server side.
All on that little Core i3?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. VMs are super CPU efficient. RAM and disk I/O is where you're going to run into trouble. So as long as you got enough RAM and enough disk I/O, the CPU calculations is really just, whatever you're telling it to do. Everything else is just loaded, and RAM is just sitting there waiting. And since RAM is so fast and the bus is so short, things happen really fast right there, as opposed to having to go through the network and come all the way back, and so.
Yeah. So with the new Xeon chip, what's the performance increase between that and the Core i3?
Well, it's 4 physical cores as opposed to two physical cores, and it's the i3 was hyper-threaded, so that would be 4 threads. This one's actually 4 physical cores, so you gain IPC, so instructions per clock that way. It's a good performance gain. I don't know that I wasn't really taxing the CPU aside from those couple of weeks. So for the most part, what I consider heavy usage, I would have my i3 somewhere around 50-60%.
Okay. And all Hyper-V for you, or do you have any? You running anything else?
Nope. I have an ESXi box. I'm running a VMware box on a little E350 USB 3. It's basically a Hudson APU board, and basically that's just running ESXi off of a USB key, and then from there I have 3 VMs inside of it. And they're just running. One's running Untangle, the other one's running Hyper-V, pfSense, and the third one's running Sophos. So it's basically my firewall box. I do firewall testing with it.
And how many NICs are you got dual NICs on there doing that,
No, it's got an Intel quad NIC.
Well, okay. I was going to ask that question. Can I run? I mean, we always talk about 2, but can I run more than 2? And
sure.
And how does server handle that?
It handles it just fine.
Okay, so not a big deal. Set those up, plug in. So you got 4 4 lines coming into that, and it just handles it.
5 actually, because there's one on the board. But yeah.
All right.
You can actually create as many. I'm not aware of any actually limitation. There may be one, but it's not anything practical. Because when you set up your virtual networking environment, it actually it's at that point where you assign the NIC to it, and you can assign whatever's physically in the machine.
So on that setup, on the Hyper-V setup, it looks for this virtual switch, right?
Correct.
And so when I'm attaching that to the environment, it's then managing all the various network ports that I have on the server.
Yeah, what it does is it takes the NIC and it binds the NIC at the hypervisor level, so that NIC no longer is really truly visible or configurable. Hyper-V is taking care of that, and what it does is it places a virtual switch in between, and so all of your VNICs that you have attached to your VMs are now talking through the vSwitch, and you can set up separate vSwitches just by adding virtual networks. That's basically adding more subnets, if you will, and then from there you can attach them to more physical NICs if you want, or you can run them all through the same port if you got if the bandwidth is okay. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you could do there.
Is there a sweet spot for the number here? I mean, I'm new. I'm coming new to this a little bit, and I haven't spent a lot of time on it. Kevin sent me some equipment. I actually have 4. I have 2 2-port Intel cards that I put in there, and server found them, and they're up and working. I haven't plugged cables into them yet, but is there anything I need to do differently on the setup, or is 4 an overkill, or talk me through that one?
I think the sweet spot is 2. One to bind to Hyper-V and one for the host.
Okay.
After that you can pretty, for a home environment, you can just use the vSwitch and then just divvy it up. My general rule of thumb is if I'm creating a separate network, separate subnet, whatever, VLAN, however you want to call it, and then I give it another physical NIC. So if I have a home network and let's say a business network or a test network, then that's 2 separate NICs, 2 physical NICs, and I just create a separate binding through the other NIC.
Okay.
I think the debate is probably a little bit differently, because the number of NICs in a home environment anyway is largely dependent on what you want to achieve with security. Right. I think the security is a bigger decision for the number of NICs than performance or bandwidth, because for me, since I'm kind of in control of my own security and everything else here, I run all of my VMs against a single NIC. As a matter of fact, it's the motherboard NIC. I didn't even upgrade that. I am going to, but for all practical purposes, I'm running off of the native NIC that's on the motherboard, and I'm transcoding my brains out with the thing and never really run into any bandwidth issues.
It all depends on your use case.
Yeah. Oh no. Well, with everything, right? I'm just thinking generally, what for the average person coming at virtualization, it seems like we've picked up on a little bit in the community, anyways, just picking up. And maybe it's just me because maybe I'm paying more attention to it now than I ever have from that standpoint. But it just seems like there's been a lot of questions around that. And then the other question that's come up is around teaming, right? That I'm seeing a lot of is teaming nodes. Is that talk about that?
Teaming is outside of a enterprise network. It's just an exercise in, hey, look what I can do.
Okay.
There's really no need for it in a home environment. I would have to question what it is you're doing that would necessitate the need for a team to NIC. I mean, outside of like failover, I mean, that's really the only reason I could see doing it at home is in case one NIC goes down, you have the other one up, and that's like if you're using it as a router or something like that. Or it's a really critical home server. Some people like to really go overboard with redundancy, Mike. But no, I mean really teaming. If you're looking at doing teaming for like performance reasons, it's not going to happen. It's just there's no way to justify the time and effort to go through teaming, and it needs to be teamed on both ends. You need to have a switch that's capable of passing those speeds. It's just really kind of, like I said, hey, look what I can do.
Bragging rights, though.
Yeah.
Well, of course. Of course.
Hey.
It's
Doesn't
like
everybody have teaming? Come on.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different than having an i7 for an HTPC. You can do it. It'll work great.
Yeah.
You can justify, well, I'm transcoding. Okay, great. Do you need it? Nope. You can get by with a $35 G620.
So I assume from Michael's response, Mike, you got something teamed in your environment there?
No, I'm just yanking his chain.
Okay.
No, actually, I agree. There's not. I mean, it's something that, given the opportunity for experimental purposes, I would like to try. I mean, I've got the hardware here. I was going to give it a shot just for the sake of the experience. But for the most part, it's not going to buy me a whole lot. I mean, I don't max out what I do right now other than, maybe 5% of the time. So I'm not real concerned that teaming is going to do a whole lot for me. But the cool factor in experimenting with it and running some benchmarks and stuff and seeing if, how much extra stuff you can tax your network with it's a cool learning experience.
Yeah, I want to ask you guys, so I've got two questions. One is the current state of Hyper-V now and some of the things you guys really like to use it for and why folks should be using Hyper-V. Second question is around R2, because there's some new things coming with R2, and I don't know if you guys have read all the documentation that are coming up on it and what changes, because I don't know enough about where Hyper-V is today to know what's going to change with R2. So let me throw that question out. Give me some highlights on Hyper-V, that folks should know about.
You want to go first, or you want me to?
Doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, let's answer the second question first, because that's a little bit shorter. I haven't looked too much into it, and certainly I'm looking forward to giving it a shot. The thing that caught my eye mostly on R2 is that the ability to assign USB. I think the pass-through of USB devices really eliminates the need for additional software and hardware in your home network. Because I think not that I'm a big, huge USB user, but I think in the home environment, there are times when you need a USB device, be it an external drive, be it syncing your, attaching your mobile device or whatever it is that you're doing. There probably is more need for a USB than possibly in the in enterprise environment. So I think the idea of adding that feature is something that is going to be useful for us using a VM environment at home. So that's just my thoughts. Now, as far as what I'm using it for, I think, again, that this is something I struggled with a long time ago, and I tried to establish where I could make the most use out of VM other than saying, wow, I can do it, and this is pretty cool. And certainly test environments, I mean, test environments, it's a no-brainer. You can't mess up your existing hardware when you do things in a VM. But that being said, translating that stuff into what you would really do in your home production environment became a little bit more of a challenge for me in trying to realize what I wanted to do. Ultimately, what I set out to do, and I've got some charts on what I really was planning initially, and of course it changed as the project went on into different things. But initially, my concept was to put things like home automation into a VM, all of my stuff for transcoding, media serving, all that type of thing was going to be parsed out into different VMs. And one of the things that prompted me to actually try ESXi and ultimately end up with Hyper-V was trying to get home automation controllers to work. That became the biggest challenge I had in the VM environment. For some reason, the USB controllers on, for like your Insteon controllers and stuff like that, just do not like working in a VM. Even though, for example, in the case of ESXi, where you can pass through USB devices, you can permanently assign them, you can control all of the aspects of your hardware. I just couldn't get it to run stable. Things would just go all squirrely, and lights would start coming on and off without me controlling it, or they would go on and they were supposed to stay on and they would go off by themselves, and all kinds of squirrely stuff took place. So ultimately that prompted me to try all types of different VMs, and that became my biggest challenge. Once I passed that point, which I ultimately decided to go to a standalone controller, but once I passed that point, things like transcoding your media, handling your movies, that became a more viable solution. I'm still running, and I'm still able to run security software, which I actually have on a dedicated VM that handles all the recordings and things like that. So those are the situations where it actually became more practical for me to run on a VM versus a physical machine. I run 4 full-time VMs right now. One is 2012 Essentials. I actually have a couple systems backing up to it, and I'm looking at the feasibility of porting, and transferring, going from WHS 2011 over to Essentials. And then I have, I actually created a separate VM machine to handle all of the annoyances of iTunes, because that is just a piece of junk in many, many different ways, but it's right now in sort of a necessary evil until I can, do something different. And then I have
Windows 7 or Windows 8, or is that?
It's running in Windows 7 right now.
Okay.
And then I have a Windows 8 test system, which I'm running different things on. And then I have a standalone Windows 7 machine, or a VM Windows 7 machine that handles the My Movies. It handles about 4 different media streamers, including Plex and Air Video and a few other things that it takes care of. So that's how I've broken mine up, and that's how I've got the benefit out of VMs in a home environment, and I was able to shut down 3 physical boxes.
Now, you're still running we're doing the Hangout. That's a physical box right now, right, that you're running the Hangout off of?
Yeah, I'm actually going to experiment with that as well. My goal is to see if I can do all of the podcasting and possibly some video recording and all that through a VM. So I'm going to play around with that.
Keep me posted on that, because every time I go down that route, the VM environments just don't seem to handle video very well.
Well, the thing I'm going to try on video, and I understand exactly what you mean, and I think the challenge or the possible solution is to use the FX in Hyper-V.
Yeah.
So I've got an extra video card here. I'm going to try to parse out, because I believe, and I may be a little off, but I believe Time Kills last year or the year before had experimented with running an HCPC off of VMs. And he was able to do that using the FX in Hyper-V. So if he can do that, if he can run full screen video, then that says that we could probably get by with the low res video we're doing for podcasting. So I'm going to experiment with that. I think that would be certainly, that's sort of a unique use case, because not everybody is concerned about that. But some of the other stuff that people need to do, I think, is there is a use case for Hyper-V. Obviously, as we said earlier, not everybody's going to go get 2012, and they may end up using the Hyper-V in Windows 8 for many other solutions.
The problem I've had is the pass through, passing the USB devices through traditionally, right, and making, the audio comes through USB as well as the video needs to. So.
And I think that's what you're going to see with the new release, is that problem will also go away. I actually have an Alertec USB, actually, I'm sorry, it's a StarTech USB device that actually has 4 USB ports. Each can be assigned to a specific VM. So I plan to use that in conjunction with FX and seeing if I can get it to work. I'm assuming it will handle the bandwidth, because I was able to actually am using it for, passing movies through it to sync up to my iPad and things like that. So if it can handle, passing a high-res MP4, it should be able to handle, the audio.
Yeah, you'd think. And I did try the FX. I didn't try it long enough. I messed around with it a little bit and couldn't get it working, and then I wanted to do some benchmark testing, so I kind of bailed on it. But Michael, so the question is, the current state of Hyper-V today as it stands, maybe kind of around, you talked a little bit about already how you're using it. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could talk a little bit about its shortcomings at this point, and then what do you see coming in R2 that might change or fix that, or break it?
Well, as far as using it, especially for the home user, I think Hyper-V specifically, you gain the benefits of it being built on top of the Windows driver stack. So a lot of things just work. You don't have to worry about, is this RAM compatible, or is this particular NIC going to work. The fact that it sits on top of Windows, if it works in Windows, it pretty much will work in Hyper-V. I think that's a benefit to using Hyper-V over, say, VMware or even Zen. VMware is kind of the de facto standard right now, currently in the industry, for any enterprise type virtualization. There are other companies that use other things like Zen, and a lot of places that are all Microsoft shops, like where I work we're entirely a Microsoft shop. So we would look at using Hyper-V. Just why introduce a third, an outside party, when you can just have support from one source. The way I use it mostly for testing and a few things around the house. I have a lot of boxes that I use for testing, for setting up different networks and trying to figure out, like, a new piece of software. How does Forefront Security work with, integrate with an Active Directory, that kind of stuff. If you're looking to be in IT, you really need to have that that ability to set something up just to keep your education going. If you just want to tinker around with it, I think Hyper-V is a pretty good solution if you can afford to get into it. The hardware isn't exactly cheap. I mean, I've done it on the cheap, but it's still fairly expensive compared to, what most people consider to be a computer nowadays. It's, you're not going to get in for, $300-$400. As far as where Hyper-V is going with R2, I'm looking forward to a lot of the new abilities that are in it. The VM Direct Connect to me is really important. That's where you're able to connect to a VM through an RDP session. I've been messing around with VDI and Remote FX, and I really like the solution. It's just right now coming across like a zero client that's affordable is really kind of hard to come by. And if you're just going to set a regular PC in place, it's kind of hard to justify going with a VDI environment when you've already bought the hardware. Another $100,
Right.
and you have a Windows 7 box. And managing it from a household standpoint. Now maybe if you got, if you have 5 or 6 kids and they're all in the preteen to early 20s zone, then it might make sense for a VDI environment just because you can wipe the computers pretty much every time they log off. But usually by then they're already asking for their own stuff anyways. So anyway, the VM Direct Connect, it looks really interesting to me. The ability to replicate to a third site is a new feature, which is nice because right now you can point to a single target, but you can't point to multiple targets. So being able to point to multiple targets is really going to be interesting, including Azure, which is not a big deal for the home user, but for business and enterprise, being able to point towards Azure would be nice. Go ahead, you had a question.
When you say point towards multiple, so I guess I don't understand how that's different from.
So in Hyper-V Replica, so you can replicate your Hyper-V to another
Right.
target.
Right.
So right now in 2012, it's limited to single replication targets. So you can only point to one, right? So it makes it difficult to support, like where a service provider is wanting to act as both like a target and for a customer to replicate to, and a source for another site to replicate to. So what you can do is you can now have the ability to support that particular scenario where you have incoming and outgoing replication happening. You can also point to multiple outs with one server.
Isn't it also have the capability on the new version to actually share a virtual drive?
Yeah, I was getting there.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. And with the replication, it's also you can do it with quicker intervals. Before, I think it was 5 minutes before, and I think now you can do it up to like 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds, you're replicating across, whatever kind of network or fabric you have in place. The compression for migration's nice. That's coming in 2012, so that'll make migration again not a big deal for a home user, but for businesses, that's really nice. Online VM exporting and cloning, so you don't have to actually save a VM or shut it off. You can actually, while it's active, clone it or export it out, which is nice when you're migrating from one metal to another, so you can actually replicate Hyper-V somewhere else and then migrate over a VM, and then from there modify it or do whatever it is you want to do with it. What else are they getting? Oh, the VDX, the online VHDX resizing is really neat, because then whoops, I took the default 120 VHDX and I really need 250 gigs for this particular VM. So just being able just to add more hard drive to it, and it'll resize on the fly. You don't have to shut it down or anything like that.
Let me ask you this question. We were talking about this in ESXi with Jay the other night, and the question was, can you increase or decrease on the fly? And the answer was, you can always increase, but never go back and decrease the amount. Is that true?
It's true. But with R2, you can actually decrease. Okay. So you can increase and decrease. So if you go 120, you're like, man, this only need 30. You can back it down. Okay. Currently, the way you can get around like space limitation is what I've been doing, which is where and I'm totally derailing it, but right. But what I'm doing is what they call differencing. So right now you have basically a static, which is where you say, I want this VHD to be 160 gigs. it's 160 gigs, and it eats 160 gigs of your hard drive space. The dynamic, you say, well, I want it to be 160 gigs. So it sets a limit of 160 gigs, but it only actually use what it needs. So if you only are using, I don't know, 40 gigs out of that 160, technically you only have 40 gigs of space physically being used. So it's basically you're over provisioning. And then differencing, what differencing does is you could set up, say, like Windows 7. You can say, okay, here's a Windows 7, and you set it aside, and you say that is my master Windows 7. And then from there, you create a differencing disk for each of your test Windows 7 installations. And what they do is anything that's the same uses that primary. And then from there, the new ones you create, you hang off of that, are only using what's different. So, if you have a Windows 7 installation with, whatever, Photoshop installed on it, the only difference is it's using Photoshop. So the drive size is only, Photoshop sized. It's not, the operating system plus Photoshop plus updates. All of that's done on the actual, parent disk. So going back to the whole,
kind of like the way we look forward to some of the backup technologies doing that for us, right?
Exactly.
We're only backed up the file once.
Yeah,
so
it's like single instance storage, basically.
Yeah,
or DD.
no, right on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically what it does. So moving that back to resizing, now you can actually resize those VHDXs, and you can choose what size you need. So that way you can, you could buy 1 terabyte SSDs now for $500. You slap one of those in there, your I/O problem's pretty much solved. Or as you found, you can take a RAID 0 of a bunch of 10,000 RPM Velociraptors that are fairly cheap at $40-50 a piece, and if you have the actual slot space, you could just run a bunch of those and get really good I/O as well.
Yeah, it sounds good.
If you take the power of the differencing, the resizing, and the sharing of VHDs, then you've got a whole entirely new use case. And I think it's almost all applicable to the home environment. It isn't just an enterprise thing, because I think that, in the home environment, you typically don't have endless storage, and especially don't have endless fast storage. So if you are going to use an SSD, yeah, you can pick one up for $500, but not everybody wants to spend $500, or they may have the drives kicking around. And with the ability to tune it, that allows you to put more production boxes on an SSD, which is sort of what I did for me. I used a 256 gig drive, and I was able to tune the size of my VXDs to make maximum use out of that SSD. And I think if I had the ability to go in and resize them right now, I'd probably make them even smaller. Or if I had the ability to use some of the other sharing techniques, because if you can picture trying to set up a home network, or some of the other things on in a virtual environment, the ability to share that virtual drive is sort of powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if the drive you're using is limited or severely limited. I mean, here you're using an SSD, and so you're wanting to get all the use out of that as you can. Although, Mike, are you worried at all on that SSD with the amount of writes that are going to go on, that's going to wear that drive out any faster?
Am I worried? No, probably not. I mean, I've tried to do the best I can to try to handle that. I've moved some of the certainly the snapshot features and paging features I've moved off the SSD, so the only thing that's actually being accessed is the virtual machine itself. So I mean, I've done what I could to limit it. Everything is protected in snapshots, so if something does go bad, the snapshots are located on another physical drive. So I mean, it wouldn't be a big deal to put it back. So no, I'm not particularly worried.
Okay. Michael, anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, there's some other neat features coming in R2. Adding to the storage again. Now you can do storage QoS, so you can basically, the same way you could do like bandwidth capping, or memory capping in a virtual environment. You can now do IOPS cap, so you can say, okay, well, I want this to have so many IOPS, and it gets this much priority on that. That's kind of neat. Linux is getting dynamic memory support, which, if you use Linux, fantastic. You can share the VHDXs. There's a lot of good stuff coming with R2. I think the fact that it's rumored that 2012 Essentials will actually get Hyper-V implemented into it. That could be a big thing for people, especially if they don't have TechNet and they're willing to drop the $400 or so for home use. For small businesses, that's really big, because they could get away with using one server that's usually spec'd out and is ridiculously overpowered to begin with for their use case. They can actually, separate it out a little bit and get a little bit more functionality, or at least a little bit better protection.
Do you think that makes it worth it? We've complained about the $400 price tag, but if you add Hyper-V in, do people stop? Nobody will ever stop totally complaining about it, but it makes it worth it, doesn't it?
I think it's a game changer. I mean, I think it certainly in a home environment. Not that it's cheap. I mean, that's still a lot of money. But I think if you look at the backup solutions, the storage solutions, and then adding the ability to run a VM environment, which means you can replicate some of those functions without having a physical box, I think it changes the value proposition quite a bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. Go ahead, Mike.
For me, it really depends on, if they bring Hyper-V to Essentials, which Hyper-V is it? Is it the Hyper-V in 2012 server, or is it the Windows 8 Hyper-V?
And the difference between the two, as you see it, are what?
One is for like, hey, this would be neat to, try out. Let me go ahead and fire up a VM. Versus the other one is, I need to actually get work done. So I'm going to use a real man's tool.
Yeah.
One's a shovel for digging out the backyard, and the other one is a backhoe for digging out the backyard.
Yeah.
If you're professionally digging out backyards, you want to use the backhoe. You're not going to use the shovel.
Would you compare Hyper-V in Windows 8 to VirtualBox? Then, from that standpoint, it does
no.
it, but it's okay.
Yeah, I would say it's better. It's implemented a little bit differently. It's not VirtualBox in that it still builds off Hyper-V, and it still has that abstraction layer in there, but it's not just a sandboxing environment where it's just going to kind of emulate. It's an actual hypervisor built into the operating system.
I think, though, just to clarify, I agree with what you said in terms of the power, but in the home environment, I don't know that there's very much difference for what the average person's going to use between the Hyper-V in 2012 and Hyper-V on Windows 8. I think the real question is, do you have the box, and is Windows 8 stable enough to not crash your Hyper-V? Probably is a bigger question. Don't run it on a Haswell chip. Yeah.
We're going to talk about that here in just a few minutes as we come around to it. John Zadler's joined us in chat, and John reminds us that you can install 2012 Essentials, use a 2012 server license key when installing it, and it'll allow you to run Hyper-V.
Okay, the problem with that is that you need to have a 2012 license key.
Right.
So at that point, why not just install 2012?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and then virtualize your 2012 Essentials.
Right. Yeah.
There you go.
I think that's that's the direction I'm heading anyway, is just to have that the 2012 virtualization base, and then do Essentials on top as a VM in that environment going forward. I still run 2011 on bare metal, but that might be the last bare metal backup box that I do. From this point on, it may be virtualized. So we'll have to see. I have a bunch more testing to do before I get to that point. And 2011 is running so well for me at this point. I'm in no hurry to make the jump to 2012, especially with some of the changes now that I'm hearing that are coming on with R2. So that may change things or the way we go about things here in the future for sure.
P2V. Physical to virtual.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
P2V,
sure.
that WHS 2011, throw it in, as a VM.
Right
and
on.
give it a try, and see how it runs. That would be probably an excellent test for anyone who has a Windows home server 2011 box that's working really well, and they know it's working really well, and they're not having any issues with it. Create a VM off of that, and then
That's a good idea.
and fire it up and just run them side by side, or shut off your physical box and see if anyone even notices, for 2-3 days.
There is a little bit of a problem with that in terms of, at least I ran into a problem with it, in terms of if you're running, say, a large storage array, trying to move it to a VHD was a little bit of a challenge. And then, of course, if you don't include that in your port over, it kind of got messed up. So you got to be a little bit careful. Depends on your particular situation. I don't know if you had that problem, Michael, but
no, I've been running virtualized. I haven't had a physical Windows home server since my HP MediaSmart box. So.
Yeah, but you weren't porting over 8 terabytes of stuff either.
Well, I run my 8 terabytes, or 6 terabytes of stuff through, pass through.
Right, but how did you get the real question is, how did you get when you created your physical to virtual?
Mm-hmm.
It tries to snapshot what you presently have in your 2011 box, right?
Yeah, but basically it just creates a VM of whatever's existing.
Right, and if whatever's existing is a huge RAID array, how did you get around that?
The RAID array was a separate just drive. So, once you represent the RAID array, it's no different than moving the RAID array from one physical box to another physical box. You point it and there it is.
Okay, so you just basically used it on your main drive, your primary drive. It probably broke all the shares and you recreated them?
No, because all of my data points to a D drive, which is where my server folders are. So when I P2V it, it's still looking at that D drive. So when I create the VM, basically I'm not even creating a VM at that point.
All right. Yeah, gotcha.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah.
So basically you take that VM, just for everyone who's listening, you're creating a VM of your physical box. It's already looking at all of the data that's there. So when you plug it into a virtual machine, that virtual hard drive is the physical hard drive that you just basically cloned, is what you're doing. And as long as you move that array over with it and point it to that array, all the data populates automatically.
Okay. I must have missed that part when I tried it, because it kind of messed mine up, so I'd have to try that again. I understand the concept, though. For some reason I didn't do that.
Well, and I have a pretty simple 2011 setup. I got a couple drives. They're all under 500 gig actually. The drives are bigger than that, but I just don't have that much data, so that'd be a process that'd go pretty fast. It should be pretty simple to do. So. We had a couple. I had a couple questions from some guys in the invite in the event on Google Plus that posted some questions. Can I throw those out right now? That'd be all right.
Sure.
So Kyle Wilcox asked. He said, "Question for the show: is it better to spend a bunch of money to get max performance from one VM host machine, or split it up and run 2 physical boxes and allow your hypervisor to gain the benefits of clustering, such as live migration?" And I know there's a lot of caveats on that, but do your best with the question.
If you have the need for two separate metal, two pieces of metal, then yes, I guess. I don't know. There's so many questions that could be, do you need live migration? Do you want separate bare metal? Are you running Active Directory on both? Is that something you're looking to do? are both pieces of metal on site? I mean,
If
are they two
failover is
different
important.
sites?
If failover is important, right?
Yeah,
Then you would,
yeah. Failover is important, or if the machines are, I mean, failover is really it. But I mean, if you're really taxing the machines, then yeah, I could, if you have like SQL Server running on one and you're just hammering the hard drives, yeah, it would make sense to migrate everything off. Move your Exchange server over to another VM on separate metal and make better use of it. I mean, obviously, if there's a couple different ways of looking at that. Either you didn't plan out for the use case correctly, and therefore you undershot your hardware, or you're working with existing hardware in place, and this is what you have, but you have multiples of them. You're virtualizing an existing setup, so now you have old hardware, but it's free to use. So you just want to replicate to it. That's perfectly fine too for failover or just redundancy.
Mike Faucher, anything to add to that?
Not really. I think, for me, I'm looking at, again, Michael said it well in terms of, what do you do for your use case? But for me, I think 95% of the people that are even going to think about VMs at home aren't necessarily concerned about live migration. I think to have one decently sized box, and it doesn't have to be, a super box, because I think all of us have tried VMs on a lighter weight box, and it had pretty good success with it. But I think if you put a box that's got decent amount of hardware, that should take care of it. I don't know that I would be concerned about getting a super server that had and being able to replicate it with live migration and all the other features that are capable in an enterprise environment.
Though, what's the scenario though as we get as we virtualize more and more of our physical boxes onto this one VM box, and that one VM box has a catastrophic meltdown on Sunday afternoon, an hour before the podcast?
Well, I think that boils down to the problem that we've had from day one. It's called backing up, and your backup scenario changes. Your volume snapshots change. How you manage those changes, but the problem doesn't change. If you are running entirely on one physical box and it crashes and burns, you still have a problem. You haven't gotten away from the need from using various cloud services to protect your critical data. VMs and stuff can be protected real easily and be recreated pretty easily. And yeah, you might suffer a little bit of downtime, but you do right now if you crash your home server or one of your main systems. So I really think it doesn't change the problem. It just changes how we go about putting in solutions.
Sure. I think it's a great answer. Also, he asks if, and I have no idea even how to answer this, but can you pool hypervisor? Can some hypervisors pool RAM across multiple physical machines? Can you share RAM across? If does that question make sense?
Yeah. If you can you have 64 gigs of RAM in one machine and 64 gigs of RAM in another machine?
Yeah, and then pool. Can you cross? Can a hypervisor or can a VM take 4 gig from one machine and run 4 gig off another machine using a pooled RAM scenario?
I don't know that you could do that with Hyper-V. I know you could do that with ESXi.
Yeah, you can, yes.
I haven't tried it with Hyper-V. I know in 2008 R2 you couldn't do it. Whether 2012 allows you to do it or not, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
There is the ability to use dynamic RAM, so you can set up, and allocate, and it will, kind of free up that memory. But it's not quite the same in Hyper-V as it is in ESXi. ESXi does have the ability to create pools of resources, and because of its more control over these VMs, you can do a lot more. Again, once you can figure out how to get to the various screens and understand a lot of the options and a lot of the third-party or independent tools that you have to use in order to get access to that stuff, there's a lot more power there than probably with Hyper-V at the present time. I think the gap is closing rapidly, but I think that in terms of his question and the ability to pool, that's better suited with ESXi.
Okay. Well, guys, we're coming up on the hour, and I still want to chat a little bit about Haswell. I have an admission to make, and then I want to chat a little bit about Haswell. So any other thoughts on virtualization?
Do it.
All right. So let me admit this. Do the admission. You guys know we've been hanging around in the community a long time. You guys know me pretty well. I have been kind of the anti-raid guy, right? In some ways, right? I was resistant to it.
I'm sure glad we're about to record this, so go ahead.
Mike Faucher, you even sent me a raid card at one point, which I still have, by the way. I still have it, and it's been sitting in a box. I used it for a little while, and then I shelved it. Jumping into this world, getting more interested in the VM world, and I got a hold of this box that's got a little bit of power to it, and I can do some, stuff with it, and then do some of the benchmark testing that I've done over the last couple weeks with that. I gotta admit, I have a little bit of raid fever at this point. I'm pretty stoked about the performance I'm getting out of it. Got some nice drives in there as well. Thanks, Kevin Schoonover sent me some drives they were getting rid of, and they're still pretty fast drives, and so I get some pretty incredible performance out of striping those in a RAID 0. And I gotta say I got a little fever, and the cure is more RAID. So that's I just thought I had to admit it on this show.
Do not cut this out of the audio track you send me, okay?
I had to when those kinds of things happen, I'll admit it. And sure enough, I'm catching a little raid fever. So so thanks for being patient with me to get to that point. So it's been interesting. I'm now thinking, all right, now what else could I do with a bunch of drives and get some incredible speed out of them? So very cool. Speaking of not cool, though, things have not gone real well on the Haswell side, especially for you, Mike. Talk a little bit about what you've done to date, and the jury's still out, right? I mean, it's just some initial testing, but talk a little bit about what's going on for you.
Well, I'll tell you what's happened. I won't tell you what the solution is just yet, but when Haswell came out, I was pretty excited. I wanted to get at least wanted to upgrade my main system, because I'm still running the 2600, which is an excellent chip, but I thought it was time to get into the the latest iteration. I was hoping really to get more performance, as well as less heat and more power efficient and all that wonderful stuff, without dragging out to the various nth detail of all the stuff that went wrong. I picked up two systems. One was a 4770, one was a 4570S, which is their super low wattage version, and my intent was to upgrade my main system, and then once that was completed, to go over and handle possibly either a server or an HTPC upgrade. So I started, probably wrongfully, but I started with the main system, and that was on June 3rd. Long story short is I have not been able to get any stability out of it. Now, I know it's not the motherboards, because I've tried both of the ones I had, and I wasn't able to get, and I've tried 3 different sets of memory. I went through that whole gyration of troubleshooting. So I'm really back down to, possibly the power supply, although I doubt it. But I'm thinking I possibly got a bad chip. But the long story short is that I actually was not able to get a stable running system. I had just notorious either blue screens, or in most cases it would just hang up when it reboots and go through, your PC had a problem and let me go ahead and run the restore. Had just notorious stability problems. I couldn't run typically for more than about 10 or 15 minutes. Even though when you would run a stress test, it would be fine. You would do something silly like let it go into sleep mode or walk away, and it would just hose up. Installation of anything and that caused a reboot would typically cause it to hose. Just a lot of problems. So I got everything going back for round 2. Because I made the mistake of buying it from Newegg, which has a no refund policy. So I've got another round of CPUs and boards coming. I probably should have tried. I just ran out of time to try the second CPU and see if that replicated the problem. So so far it hasn't been really good. I will tell you that while it was running in those short bursts of time, It was definitely visually faster. I didn't have a chance to benchmark it or do any of the technical stuff, but just the reaction, the user reaction, and how well it ran, even, you know, though I was running a completely rebuilt system, it was noticeably faster. One thing that disappointed me, however, is I expected it to run cooler. It does not run cooler. It runs hotter. It has a very strange heat characteristic when it's more or less idling and just doing things like a Word document or something taxing like that. It runs pretty cool, typically around the 87 to 89 degree Fahrenheit range. But if you do anything at all, even something as simple as a software install or any type of loading of software or anything, it instantly jumps to 160 degree Fahrenheit. It just instant. I mean, within a second. There's almost no ramp at all, which is completely different characteristic than what I saw in Sandy Bridge. So, which typically had a more linear ramp up, and and from my experience anyway, using the same cooler, Sandy Bridge was probably in the neighborhood of about 20 degrees Fahrenheit less cooler. So I'm not sure what that all means yet. All I know is right now I'm at ground zero, basically starting over again. So next week when I get the next round of CPUs and boards, hopefully I'll have better luck. I am not even going to attempt to do this to my main system because in the last week I have installed Windows 8 enough to burn through a TechNet key. I've completely expired one key just in reinstalls over the last 4 or 5 days. So I'm going to take your advice and download the trial version. And just in case I got to do 85,000 reinstalls again.
The trial version can sometimes be your friend, especially now that Microsoft's gone back to that activation model. You should be able to skip it Windows 7.
Yeah, right.
And you just be fine, and they give you 30 days to activate. Windows 8 not so, Windows Server 2012 not so. You've got to activate each of those right on the spot, which is kind of annoying. That's kind of horrible. Well, I'm sure, Mike, you'll have more to say on this next week on next week's BYOB.
Oh, I will. I mean, the saga is going to continue. Unfortunately, it's going to continue probably for at least one more part. I'm really hoping to get some resolution by this next round, at least to understand what it can be that's causing these issues.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think we've been talking about Haswell for a while. Michael, any thoughts on your side? Have you gone out and bought anything yet, or are you still just holding off?
Nope. Everything I've read is pointing towards not by even bothering with Haswell. The more I read, the more the worse it gets. Mike's kind of substantiating that with the fact that it does run hotter and it doesn't overclock as well. Which makes sense just based on the fact that Ivy Bridge is like a 77 watt and Haswell is like an 80 something watt CPU. So it would make sense that if they had to raise the TDP by about 10, that it's running hotter to begin with. Short of, I'm definitely not going to use it for a desktop, which is one of the reasons why I went with an older Sandy Bridge Xeon. For my server, I'd rather just have a more stable platform to work off of. For Haswell going forward, maybe on a laptop once I see what battery life is like and see if some of the low power stuff is actually worth it. But if I'm gonna have another super hot laptop sitting on my lap just because this thing just cooks, even in a mobile environment, I don't really need the tan on my legs. So in a podcast with you and Rich O'Neill a couple weeks back, you recommended that Rich wait for Haswell on a laptop purchase. Yep. Are you still holding? I'm still holding fast to that because I think if it lives up to what they're supposed to be doing for Haswell in the mobile environment, obviously they got to downclock it and everything. I think for desktop, I think this thing is geared so much towards mobile. In order to get a decent desktop clock out of this, that to actually sell it over Ivy Bridge, I think they had to actually raise the TDP. I think once it goes to a mobile environment where people really they're not really comparing gigahertz at that point. It's more like, whoa, is the laptop thin and light? Is it shiny? Does it have an SSD? Does that SSD only have 3 gigs of space left because manufacturers still can't figure out how to do SSDs properly? I think that is more important to people than, hey, this one's 0.2 gigahertz faster.
Right.
There's a couple other things. My opinion is that I think Intel focused, I would say, 80% of their energies on the mobile platform. So I'm really expecting to see, like Michael said, a better outcome of the mobile platform than what we saw with the desktop. I think the desktop was a kind of they needed to do something, so they kind of put a little bit of energy into it. I think the next click iteration of the Haswell will be pretty awesome. And the other factor out of all this is, I think their thrust was power management, not so much TDP and what happens if you run your CPU cranked all the time. I think the ability to downstep it and to be able to manage power out of the wall, they did a pretty decent job in. That wasn't so much an interest to me, though. I mean, whether I save a couple of watts out of the wall wasn't my big thrust. I was more interested in, the overall cooling and the internal heat and all the other stuff that goes along with it. So I think we'll see it. The other factor that really complicates things is the Series 8 chipset. I think that adds a whole bunch of stuff, and the drivers are entirely different, and I think that adds a whole new set of dynamics. So I think there's some growing pains there too. I certainly wouldn't recommend anybody go to Haswell on a home server just yet. I think if you're going to play around with it on a standalone box and see what you can find before porting it over, because I know there was some talk in the chat about possibly speccing out a Haswell box. I agree with Michael. Stick with a tried and true right now. Again, I'm not going to give this up, and I may change my tune in about 3 weeks and say go for it. But right now, I'd be hard pressed to tell anybody to go get a Haswell home server.
Yeah, so a little bit of caution.
Yeah, a little bit of caution
going into this. And I think in most times there's a platform change like this, early adopters always pay the price.
I went through the same thing, by the way, with Sandy Bridge, so yes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, we're at about 1:20. Any other thoughts, anything you guys need to pimp for your show before I kind of start the pre-flight landing stuff for mine? Or I should say the post-flight, maybe.
My seat is in the full upright position, and my tray is snowed.
Your tray is locked.
Hurry up and land it so I can turn my cell phone back on, would you?
No, I just wanted to say, Jim, thanks again for the joint podcast. It's always a pleasure to do this as a collaborative effort.
Yeah, right on. I appreciate you guys doing it with me, and this is a fun, so it's turning out maybe about once a week or every 5 or 6 weeks we get a live show for you guys. I have everything set up to be able to do that. It's not as easy for BYOB to do that, so it's great to get you guys on and get a live show. The chat room was great, so appreciate everybody out there in chat. Good lively conversation. Good to see John Zadler out there and everyone else that made the live show. And it's good on a Sunday afternoon to get together and do this. So appreciate you guys being willing to come out and wrap up kind of our series on virtualization. We'll look forward to maybe a month from now as we get into early July. We'll get together, the three of us, and talk about the new Windows 8, and we can tear that apart. I'm sure Michael Martis will have some good things to say about that. As he snickers. Well, I'll remind folks, for those listening to my show, and you can get BYOB on this too. If you're new to podcasting or you're not finding a great way to listen to podcasts, actually Stitcher. If you haven't tried that yet, Stitcher Radio, or just go out to Stitcher.com. It's a great way to listen to podcasts. They've amped up the quality over the last couple months. It was kind of poor audio quality before, and it's actually really good now. And so if you need an automatic way to get your podcasts or not to miss BYOB or miss Home Tech every single week, it's out there and available on Stitcher. Just go to Stitcher.com, available on any browser, any OS, just about any phone. It's still not they still don't have a Windows Phone app. I just checked this week. Still on a Windows Phone, but any of those platforms, Stitcher.com, you can head out there and get the podcast each week and listen to them on a regular basis in your car, as you're mowing the lawn, whatever you're doing, both mobile and at home. Stitcher.com, give it a try, and we say here it's education for your ears. And then I'll remind you for my show, all the live links and everything you need to know to get involved in the community. If you head out to the YouTube, in fact, at the end of this, Lapta mentioned that he's going to have to watch the recorded version of this. Lapta, in about 10 minutes, it'll be available on YouTube. So go to youtube.com/TheAverageGuyTV, and it'll be available out there to watch right as soon as it's done. They seem to get that done faster and faster all the time. You can join the regular Home Tech Show 8 p.m. Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Central on Thursday nights at TheAverageGuy.tv live. You're probably there right now watching this if you're on the live show. And don't forget our Facebook group's doing real well too around. It's a lot like forums. It's like the Home Server Show forums just on Facebook. You head over there to facebook.com/group/TheAverageGuy. Let's see, The Average Guy. Yeah, just The Average Guy. I did a really bad thing, and I named some things The Average Guy and some The Average Guy TV. That was a huge mistake because I can never remember which is which. But head over to that Facebook group, and we're giving away $100 when that group reaches 100 Amazon dollars. Join us, and you will automatically be put in the contest for that. All right, good enough, guys. Thanks again for being hosts and doing this on a Sunday afternoon. It's always great to podcast with you guys, so I appreciate it. We'll say goodnight to everybody in the chat room, and thanks again. Appreciate it. Good night.
All right, thanks, Jim.